So I want to thank everybody and welcome. It's such a pleasure to keynote here at the AI Expo Africa, which is the leading top business-to-business and government conference in Africa. And again, a big welcome. Now I'm going to talk about the fifth machine age, driving digital reshaping and the new world. What will it be like? I'll talk about technology innovation, AI and foundational leadership and use case trends for global good. Now, embedded in my keynote, I have chats with some of the top leaders in the world, and I also have demonstrations. Now, you can find extended interviews going beyond the chats under IEEE TEMS. Just search for IEEE TEMS and the leaders I have profiled. Now, let's get into my presentation. So I'm now going to set up and share my screen. So here we go. Again, the fifth machine age, driving digital reshaping. So what a great way to start this keynote, but with the introduction here of Dr. Chasib Lee. And I reached out to him because he's the director for the UN ITUT, which is the founding host for this world famous summit and program called AI for Good. And, you know, they have a global impact, really influencing now 7.8 billion people. It's been adopted by governments and industry and academia and 38 UN agencies. And they're scaling AI solutions for the UN SDGs. So here's Dr. Chasib Lee.
Hi, Steve. As you know, I'm a techie. So therefore, I'm happy that the two miracles that we have seen so far during COVID are both due to science and technology. The first miracle was the fast development of vaccines against COVID. The second miracle was that the digital infrastructure didn't crash. I'd like to offer two food for thoughts. First, continue to keep your eyes on AI. AI is likely to be the dominant technology of the future. I see two reasons for that. One is that AI can be so unbelievably good at analyzing data, especially. The second reason is the hope or the fear of artificial general intelligence. No one knows if it will come and if when. But I agree with those who say that we need to prepare for it now. ITU, the UN's specialized agency for ICTs, does a lot of work on AI. We feature an always-on, all-year digital platform called AI for Good, with almost daily programming on how AI can help achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. One of ITU's most exciting areas of work is our collaboration with the WHO. Together, we are trying to answer the question, what does it take to trust an AI solution in the health sector? So we believe that the benchmarking framework that we are developing will provide an answer. My second food for thought will surprise you. I have spent my professional life together with the ITU, helping connecting billions of people and zillions of devices. But my advice is this: we now need to learn to disconnect at times. And perhaps this is more difficult than solving the technical challenges of connecting our planet.
So here we have Dr. Chasib Lee. So where are we today? Well, let's take a snapshot. So some of the resources I recommend that you can use for your digital reshaping rooms or situation rooms to keep track of what's happening out there in the marketplace, especially if you're in business or in government, is a book called Own the AI Revolution. It's a bestseller. There's another one called Smart Humanity that came out this year. In fact, I did a chat with Wouter, who's the co-author. So in terms of where we are today, I mean, I have an iPhone with an A14 Bionic chip. It's amazing. It has close to 12 billion transistors and can do 11 trillion operations per second. That's really a supercomputer in my hand. And if you look at supercomputers themselves, they've now gone to something called exascale, or exa floating point operations per second. That's 1,000,000 trillion operations per second. That's so powerful that you can actually model the world within a supercomputer. They call that a metaverse. And as an example, you have NVIDIA, which is predicting in just the next 2 to 3 years, they'll have a AI supercomputer that will do 20 exaflops. They're also indicating that, as a point of comparison, and from an AI application standpoint, the human brain has 100+ trillion synapses in the cerebral cortex. And they feel that AI models will be over 100 trillion parameters in size by 2023. And again, as a point of contrast, we have OpenAI and GPT-3, which has 175 billion parameters. And just recently, China came out with the Wu Duo 2, which has 1.75 trillion. And of course, Google has come out with about something with about 1.6 trillion. Now, if you want to find out more, I really recommend the keynote by Jensen Huang. Just an amazing keynote about where AI is going. But I also did a chat with Keith Streer, who's the Vice President of Worldwide AI Initiatives at NVIDIA. So again, if you want to track trends, one of the top applications I recommend is something called Event Registry. And just to illustrate its power, I did a search on AI and machine learning, found 17 million plus articles. And you can actually get a list of topic areas and their relevance to AI machine learning. You can also get a tag cloud and a timeline. And if you look at this timeline, you can see the sort of escalation in articles on AI. And I also did one, and the same with Africa. It's the same sort of pattern. You can do a sentiment analysis from very positive to very negative, and you can get a concept graph in real time. And just by clicking on any one of these areas, you can get more details. You can also get concept trends over a period of time. And you can get article categories, what percentage are about science or the arts and business. And again, by clicking on any one of these segments, you can get more details. I can also get breaking events as they happen around the world in real time. And just by clicking on one of these circles, I can mine it for more information. Well, how about responsible leadership innovation, and what are some examples? Well, we have Ada Labs here in Africa, founded by John Kemmerich. And in fact, I just did a chat with him recently. Recommend you have a look under IEEE TEMS. But he's targeting to create 300 companies in Africa, train 6,000 engineers, plus engineers trained in blockchain, and have animators, and also producing something like over 1 million jobs. There's the Knowledge Pledge, which is sharing knowledge to scale impact. And it's an open platform. You can apply to see if your project can be scaled, and you can get these executives and others to help mentor you. And I did a chat recently with the executive chairman, Alain Chatrit, under IEEE TEMS. There's a company called DTGO, which is based out of Thailand, but they're also doing investments now in Africa. And they won the top ethics award for 2019, 2020, and in fact, even 2021, just recently. They have 2 labs, one called the Risk Lab, where they take the top innovations worldwide and they innovate it in their lab, and then they share those innovations. There's another one called Future Tales Lab that looks further out. They also have something called T&B Media Global, which is one of the top media companies working on producing animations and television shows and movies, but must have a sustainable impact message. And then finally, I want to point out Ad Astro Venture Studio, and that's a fund solving the world's biggest challenges. So if you are in that space and you think you have something to share, once you get in touch with them, or the Terry Sakti Institute, which is working on biomedical innovation. And in fact, I did a chat with Mauricio Vecchione. You can find this in IEEE TEMS. To illustrate further, I reached out to John Hennessy, and a remarkable person. He set up the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program. It's the world's biggest that $750 million at Stanford. 16 years, the president of Stanford, in fact, the most successful, and now president emeritus. He's the chairman of the board of Alphabet, which is closing on to a $2 trillion company. He's won the ACM Turing Award, which is the Nobel Prize in Computing Science. And he's you know, a legend in terms of investments and founding of companies. So here's my chat with John Hennessy.
What are maybe 3 or 4 things that you think are really interesting in your mind that you want to bring attention to the world?
Well, I think certainly one would have to say the remarkable ongoing progress in deep learning and artificial intelligence. It continues at an amazing rate. You look at the AlphaFold result. Here, people have been working on this protein folding problem for decades. In fact, my good colleague at Stanford, Michael Levitt, won the Nobel Prize for work he did many, many years ago on this field. And all of a sudden, in comes this AI approach and becomes the best solution in the world. It's truly amazing. And the scale of the models they're building, GPT-3 and these other models are phenomenal. So I think it's an ongoing revolution, and we're constantly surprised by, once a year, there's something truly dramatic, which even in a technical field, that's a lot. Once a year is a lot, a rapid rate of change. I think we see some other good things emerging. I think there finally is the determination to grapple with the climate change agenda, and hopefully this time we can do it right and really get a set of climate change agreements globally, because it has to be global, that we can make a change. We're going to keep working on technology. The technologists are working hard on new energy technologies and new battery tech. Energy storage is such a big problem. They're working hard on it, but we're going to need policy to come together at the same time. And I'm hopeful with changes in Washington, the US can be back in a leadership role in making that happen. I think the final thing is you have to just be astounded by what happened with these vaccine developments. Astonishing results. It's science to the rescue, absolutely science to the rescue. Record time. You know, the record for a mass vaccine that would be given out in large numbers in the world was about 7 years previously. And here they did this in less than a year. Using new technology, mRNA vaccine. This is the first time they've actually used this approach to build a vaccine. But what's remarkable about it is it's a way to build vaccines that can be done very quickly. Now that we can genotype a virus and get its RNA structure, we can build these vaccines very quickly. So it builds on a long history of what's remarkable at the AI area, the work in energy technologies, builds on a long history of basic research in materials in the biosciences that occurred over decades. And then all of a sudden we get a breakthrough because everything just comes together. And I think that's the way science works.
You know, so I recommend to look at, again, the extended chat you'll find under IEEE 10s. I also reached out to Florian Kemmerich, and the reason is he's an investor, one of the partners of Bamboo Capital. But he's also chair of the YPO Impact Networks Council. And YPO is a group of 30,000 plus CEOs across 142 countries that does something like 9 trillion in annual revenue, which would rank them 3rd as a country in GDP. And then recently they announced a partnership with the Global Impact Investments Network. And, you know, keep in mind, there's over $400 trillion in wealth globally, and it's moving increasingly into impact investment, and Africa is going to be a big beneficiary of that. He's also working on scaling this impact program within YPO. So I reached out to Florian, so here he is.
Florian, you are a world-class venture capitalist, really affecting the world globally from your investments, working with United Nations, also with communities of large companies and medium company CEOs. Can you give us some examples of some trends you're seeing, and then a real example of how it's being used?
Absolutely, Stephen. So the trend we're seeing is aid money, developed money coming into sustainable models, as well as mainstream capital coming to the table on impact investing, ESG, that's massive, as well as technology being the key enabler and driver of access and affordability throughout the world, especially for the developed market, for the developing markets to really tap into huge underserved markets. And if you look at what is happening here is very exciting. Let me cite one example. A company we're invested in, amongst many others, is called Bbox, BBOXX, which is kind of a Tesla or an Amazon, but more Tesla model for the rural poor, where they deliver energy. And all of that is done with a data platform, B2C, and it's solar home units. So the performance of the units are remotely measured, charge algorithms are adapted. The workforce is pushed with tasks to deliver the service 24/7. And the most exciting part is that population on the ground creates a credit history and therefore starts to tapping into the real economy. And that is going as we speak. It's scalable, 500,000 households today. The data on the performance of the batteries, the data on the performance of the platform, the AI role into it is very exciting. And we believe there is major gain. And this is also where we say that the Western world should have a look at that and understand that leapfrogging is faster, cheaper, with no incumbent technologies to perform than maybe trying to do changes in the US or in the Europe.
Amazing example. Thank you, Florian.
So what's happening is Africa is going to be the center of innovation and so forth because of this leapfrogging. And then that technology will migrate into Europe and North America and worldwide. And fintech is a clear example. So where are we from an ethical implication standpoint? Well, I wrote an article in Forbes this year just for you on responsible AI to follow and implement, and this year being a breakout year. What's happening is the over 300 initiatives, frameworks are being operationalized, and there's even some legislation coming out, for example, just recently announced through Europe. Some of the leaders would be in Canada and Australia, UNESCO on the recommendation on the ethics of AI, the World Economic Forum and the world they're doing. And Microsoft, for example, has one for executives, AI Business School. So here's my view of where technology adoption is going to be. And just to act as a bit of a benchmark, I'm using the technology categories that the World Economic Forum uses. So I see in the next 3 years, financial services being 150 trillion, healthcare 15 trillion. And in the 90 percentile adoption of big data and biotechnologies, and the 80 percentile for machine learning, and the 70s for the Internet of Things, the cloud, augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, and encryption. In the 60s for wearable technologies, but in healthcare in the 80s. And the 40 percentile quantum computing and humanoid robots, but in the 50s for healthcare. And then in the 20s for 3D printing, but in the 50s for healthcare. And then if you average across all the major industries, again, you can see these trends like in the 90s for big data, things like new material science being in the 60s and so on. So what I'm doing now is I reached out to some of the startups, the top startups globally, for example, Jill Perry, to get his views and to see some demonstrations of interesting technology.
Hey Steve, it's Gil Perry here from DID. We are a startup based in Israel with deep learning technology in the face space. There are 3 digital trends we believe companies need to adopt aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Firstly, in an increasingly digital world, much more data is being generated about all of us. Because of that, companies need to put privacy at the heart of everything they do. The right not to be identified and the right not to have your personal data shared is becoming fundamental. Secondly, the world is pivoting to video. People increasingly prioritize moving images over text, and so do the channels they consume it in, like social media. But video is expensive. An important solution is to invest in generating videos synthetically. The latest AI techniques mean that even still images can be turned into video, and photorealistic avatars can convey information that previously would have meant an expensive video shoot. Third, This might sound odd in the context of digital technology and business, but try to connect emotionally. One of our biggest hits to date has been the work we did with genealogy site MyHeritage. Our tech breathed life into photos that people had of their loved ones, generating a huge connection and wave of emotion. Imagine, what are the feelings we can spark with such technology?
They're now scaling that kind of technology for museums and to preserve heritage sites and so on. So I'm a big fan of CB Insights, and I recommend you have a look. And they produce reports annually called Game Changers. And I've adapted from those reports for this slide here. So for example, you'll see it's 34 categories they identify as being game changers over the next 10 years. Quantum and AI, and Xanadu has been an example of a startup. AI accelerating edge computing sensors and so on, and Anagog as a startup. Vehicles communicating with everything around them. Savari as an example of a startup. New kinds of computing chips. So for example, one's using light or photonic chips, and light matter being an example. And quantum technology being applied to cryptography and communication, sensing and computing. There's over 50 research groups, and there's even now an indication there's over 500 startups. So, but what I consider to be the most important is AI transparency and Darwin AI. And this year, intelligent tutoring and education and differential privacy, owning a piece of anything, and ambient intelligence just being embedded everywhere. To illustrate, CB Insights has identified Darwin AI, as I mentioned earlier, as a top startup both in 2020 and 2021. And they've been identified as one of the top game changers as well. So I reached out to the founder, Sheldon Fernandez. So here he is.
Hey, Sheldon, thank you for coming in to share your, globally elite, top-ranking insights on AI machine learning with our audience. And you've been validated. For example, CB Insights, a really trusted third-party research group, has indicated that you're amongst the top AI companies in the world. Also, in another category, you're considered one of the top change makers in transformation worldwide. Plus, you've been validated by Gartner and many other sources. For example, Nature, which is a really prestigious publication, has also produced some of your work as well. So, and then you have your co-founder, who happens to be the Canadian Research Chair in AI for Canada at a top research institution in the country, in fact, ranked amongst the world, and that's Alex Wong, and just makes a powerful combination with your entrepreneurship background. So if you can explain some of the work that you're doing for our audience.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thank you again for having me. So it's been a very exciting time since we last spoke and connected on our progress at Darwin. We continue to work with very large enterprises to implement efficient and robust AI systems. One of the new areas that we're evolving is not only this idea of explainability, which is how does something work, but the idea of trust, and that is when and where does it work and with what confidence level. What we've discovered is that as enterprises now have moved from the implementation phase to actually deploying AI, one of their key questions is, well, under what circumstances can I trust this AI? And that is coming from, an internal understanding that they have or requirement that they have, but also regulatory pressure that they're starting to see from regulatory bodies like the FAA, the JAIC, DOD, etc. So we have developed some very interesting scholarship around this, which we've published and baked into our core commercial offering. And it's quite exciting to see the reception of that scholarship in the enterprise.
And I understand you've been working with like Lockheed Martin, Honeywell, for example. There's a food group backed by Engine, which is the top manufacturing supercluster looking at next generation manufacturing, with Aspire Foods, which is sort of a new protein source using cricket. So you've really been applying this work in grand manner. Are there any other insights you want to bring in? Then we'll close.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is we're looking at applied AI use cases that resonate with the business. So whereas before they wanted to understand AI and they were happy with all the flashy, terms and grandiose terminology, now the question is being asked, okay, how can AI tangibly affect and benefit my business? And one of the areas where we've illustrated that is manufacturing. And so we've worked with some of the companies you mentioned, large aerospace global companies, to really improve their manufacturing efficiencies and processes. And being able to do that and illustrate to executives who need to be answerable to the business around the investment of AI has been really key for us. So applied AI is very much a theme for us in 2021. And our track record thus far of doing this successfully for the enterprise is quite satisfying.
Well, thank you, Sheldon. And I know you can get something like a 10x, even a performance increase and a much smaller footprint as well, which talks about edge computing, the application really everywhere. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with our audience. Thank
you for having me, Stephen.
I should mention that Sheldon has also released in Darwin AI something called COVIDNet to use their technology. It's open source, freely available. Hundreds of researchers and companies are using it. And again, using imaging to help with the COVID situation. So how about next generation machines in AI? Well, there's this concept called super Turing analog computing machines based on a paper by Singelman and Sontag. Potentially, it could be better than any supercomputer or even quantum computing. Emmett Red produced a piece of hardware with Singelman suggesting that this is even possible. And then this whole idea of a generalization of AI, and two researchers I think are doing really interesting work in this area, Pedro Domingos and Judea Pearl. Finally, I want to talk about quantum computing. We're starting to see early proof of concepts and proof of business. You saw quantum supremacy announced by Google in China in the last couple of years, where you can solve a problem in seconds, which could take maybe 2 billion years. IBM announcing their 1 million qubit roadmap, a qubit being sort of a measure capability. Honeywell announcing the same kind of idea. Nearly 50% now planning pilots by 2025 and looking for broader commercialization by 2030. And so I did a series of interviews, one with Michele Mosca and Worley, Stefan Werner, and Scott Harrison. Recommend you have a look. These are all found under IEEE TEMS, and I wrote a couple of articles in Forbes. Again, I recommend you have a look. So the top applications today would be in things like AI and machine learning, financial services, chemical, oil and gas, and more. All of these companies are top vendors. An indication now there's over 500 startups and even platforms to develop software. Financial services probably has the highest return in the near term. And you can see all of the possibilities like predicting risk and uncertainty, reaching the 2 billion unbanked by reducing the 40 billion lost annually through poor data analysis and so on. Finally, I wanted to reach out and end with the World Food Program and what they're doing, because they have an open platform called the Innovation Accelerator, which anybody can apply for. So here's Bernard Kowich, the head of that program.
Hello, Stephen. At the World Food Program, our mission is to end hunger. Right now, there's 690 million hungry people globally. And we as World Food Program, we actually reach 114 million of them in 88 countries already, both through life-saving food assistance, but also by sustainably changing lives, sustainably ending hunger. Unfortunately, we are nowhere near zero hunger, which is the goal of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is where my current job comes in, the WFP Innovation Accelerator. We are looking for the best and brightest ideas, innovations, and startups that can help us reach the goal and support them. I want to talk about 3 specific examples. The first up is called Building Blocks, where we use blockchain wallets to provide cash to refugees so they can go into stores and purchase food. This is already being used by 990,000 refugees in Jordan and also in Bangladesh, where we save 98% of the banking fees, making it more efficient to help, but it's also a better service for them using that technology. A second example I want to mention is called Hunger Map Live, where we use artificial intelligence for real-time information that we can use to identify hungry people so that we can deliver food to the right people at the right time. And it uses AI to overlay different sources of data, in-person surveys, satellite imagery, and other surveys we're using to provide that information. A third example I want to talk about is called AHEAD. It's a teleoperated, semi-autonomous vehicle. It sounds like science fiction, but we're actually working on that with the German Aerospace Center right now to put that into use in places, for instance, in conflict zones where we cannot put people at risk driving those vehicles actually. And this has led to us just recently receiving the award by Fast Company's Most Innovative Nonprofit Organization and so many other recognitions, including the Nobel Peace Prize for the World Food Programme most recently. Thank you very much.
So I should mention they Share the Meal app has won the top awards from Google and Apple last year, and they've got over 100 million meals served. They have something in the hydroponics area as well, growing food anywhere in the world and so on. So that's it. That's the end of my presentation. So I'm calling for global cooperation. Let's work together to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. And again, I want to thank you for allowing me to share some of my insights with you today.